Alright, it's mid-February here, and we're out on one of our first walks of the year. We found 3 so far, unfortunately all old ones, but this one was a good one at one time. But I figured I'd share just a few quick tips about what I look for when I'm shed hunting. I wouldn't say I'm the world's greatest shed hunter. I end up usually turning these into scouting missions and looking up at trees instead of on the ground, but some of the things, especially if you have the option to pick when you go shed hunting, today's conditions are about as optimal as they get. It just rained this morning, so everything's kind of dark and wet, cloudy sky. You don't have the sun creating a bunch of shadows. Everything seems to really pop in conditions like we have today, so that's the main reason we decided to come out, especially when you're walking timber like this. These are the days where I again find a lot of old sheds that we've missed in previous years, and that's holding true today. As far as locations, everyone always talks about those south-facing slopes, and we find a lot of sheds in those areas, but do not overlook east-facing slopes either, because you think about it, that's the sun. After a long night of feeding, the deer going down to bed, the first thing that the sun's going to hit in the morning is those east-facing slopes. So I find a lot of sheds on those east-facing slopes. I would say just as many as I do on the south-facing slopes. Of course, you want to be somewhat close to food this time of year when the deer are shedding their antlers. They're pretty much just bed to food and back again. But I would say I find a lot more antlers in bedding areas than I do actually in the feeding areas. So look at those spots where the deer are bedding somewhat close to a food source. Waterways near food sources are always a really hot spot to find antlers. But just focus on those areas where the deer spend the most time, which is the bedding areas typically. That's where I find probably 75% of my shed antlers. It's important too when you're out walking to not just randomly scan the areas, focus in specifically on something to look for, and for me the number one thing is tines. I don't know what the percentage is, but I would guess well over 80% of antlers land tines up. So I try to train my eyes to look for those vertical lines that kind of just stick out from all the rest of the kind of jagged sticks. If I find multiple vertical lines that could represent tines, I'm usually trying to glass those. So narrow in on something specific. Don't look for a whole antler. Try to focus on what's most likely that's going to catch your eye. And the second thing that I look for is the curve of a beam. You could spot that whether it's face down or face up, if you want to call it that. You could spot that curve of the beam, and in an environment like this where you get a lot of jagged lines, especially at ground level with the little saplings and stuff, you can find some with a nice curve like that. That's another good way to narrow down your focus when you're looking for shed antlers. So be specific with what you're looking for. You'll end up missing less, and take your time. That's one thing that I have to slow myself down, especially when I come across a good area that I think they're likely to be a shed antler. Really need to slow down and look. I guarantee we miss a lot more than we find. So take your time. Helps having buddies. We got 3 of us out here today. Those are the best tips I can offer as far as finding more antlers.